Fat obese girl left hanging, with sign, Indian land, lonely mountain man, cut her down. The winds that blew across the borderlands carried a bitterness only late autumn could bring. Dry grass bowed under each gust, bending like rows of weary soldiers. And in the middle of that lonely stretch of no man's land stood a single post of rough-hewn pine, tall enough for anyone passing by to see exactly what had been done. Mercy Callahan dangled from it by her wrists. 27 years old, soft-faced and full-figured, she had lasted longer than anyone in Blackwater expected. 2 nights, 2 days. The skin above her wrists had been rubbed raw by the coarse rope, and her legs had grown so numb she could barely feel the cold earth beneath her bare feet. Her once brown dress had been torn by wind and stones. Her dark hair hung in knotted strands across her face, and nailed to her chest by a thin strip of leather was a crude wooden board. The letters burned into it glowed a harsh red against the fading day. Indian land, leave her for the savages. The townsfolk had laughed when they dragged her out here. They had jeered as though tossing out spoiled food. Mercy had heard their voices echoing long after they left. "She's a thief," they spat, "caught with stolen bread." But Mercy knew the truth. She had taken nothing. The loaf she had been holding was moldy trash thrown behind the bakery. She had been hungry. That was her crime. When she had begged them to believe her, they'd only laughed harder. "Look at her," the mayor's wife, Constance Whitmore, had sneered. "A fat, greedy thing like that? Of course she stole it." Then came the sentence. Not jail, not a fine. Humiliation, fear, a slow death under open sky. Mercy's lips were cracked, bleeding. She whispered small prayers, though her voice was too faint to carry beyond her own shoulders. Her thoughts drifted between desperate hope and numb surrender. She wondered if anyone back in town even remembered she was still here. She wondered if the night coyotes would come before exhaustion finally claimed her. She wondered, too, if she deserved this. Years of insults had carved deep places inside her. Ugly, useless, worthless. The words clung to her as tightly as the rope above her head. But then, faint at first, came the sound she thought she was imagining. A horse, single rider, steady, unhurried hoofbeats crossing the open field. Mercy tried to lift her head. The world blurred, split, then steadied. Through the haze, she saw a lone figure on a massive buckskin stallion. A broad-shouldered man, tall as the post she hung from, wrapped in worn bear skin and dust, moving with the quiet authority of someone who belonged more to the wilderness than to any town. Silas Thornwood, the man the townsfolk called the Lone Wolf. And the moment his eyes found her, the softness of the light shifted, because no one could look at Mercy hanging there and remain unchanged. Silas Thornwood reined in his horse with the quiet precision of a man who'd spent more years in wilderness than among townsfolk. The stallion snorted, stamping against the cold soil, but Silas barely noticed. His eyes were fixed on the figure hanging from the post. The shape of her, the stillness of her, the cruel board strapped across her chest. His jaw clenched. He had seen cruelty in every shape a frontier could carve. But there was something about this, about a woman left half dead to frighten others, that stirred a fury he hadn't felt since the night he'd lost everything. He swung down from the saddle and crossed the distance with long, purposeful strides. Mercy's head hung forward, her hair hiding most of her face, but he could see the shallow rise of her breathing, fragile as a candle flame in storm wind. Easy, he murmured, not to her, but to steady the rising heat in his own chest. He reached up, cut the rope with a flick of his hunting knife, and caught her before she hit the ground. Her body slumped against him, heavier than her broken sobs suggested. She flinched, expecting more blows, expecting more hatred. Instead, she felt arms, strong, steady, and startlingly gentle, gather her in as though she were something precious. "Who did this?" Silas asked, though the board across her chest already gave him the answer. Mercy blinked weakly, her voice barely a whisper. "The mayor, his wife, the judge, the whole town." She didn't finish. Shame pressed her throat closed. Silas felt the old ache in his own heart stir. He carried her toward his horse and lifted her carefully as though she were made of spun glass. The world had taken too much from her already. He refused to add a single bruise to that list. She managed another few words. "Why? Why are you helping me?" Silas didn't answer at first. He mounted behind her, wrapping his coat around her trembling shoulders, then nudged the horse into a slow pace, heading north, toward the hidden valley only he and the wind knew well. Only then did he speak. Because cruelty should never be left unanswered. Mercy closed her eyes, not from fear this time, but from exhaustion. Silas felt her relax, not fully, just enough to trust that she wouldn't fall. And in that tiny act of trust, his chest tightened. He had forgotten what it felt like to be needed, forgotten what it felt like to matter. As the horse carried them deeper into the pines, Silas studied her through the corner of his eye. Mercy wasn't what townsfolk claimed she was. She wasn't grotesque. She wasn't shameful. She was simply a woman shaped differently than the cruel world preferred, and that world had used her softness as an excuse to sharpen its teeth. He hated them for it, not just because they had harmed her, but because they reminded him of another cruelty long buried beneath time and grief. His wife, Hannah, had suffered at the hands of a frightened, ignorant town, too. The memory of her pleading eyes he hadn't reached in time, still lived in the quiet spaces of his mind. Mercy stirred against him. "I didn't steal," she whispered. "I swear I didn't." "I know," Silas said quietly. "I can tell." "How?" she asked, voice trembling. He offered a small, sad smile she could not see. "Because I've met thieves. None of them cry when they speak the truth." Mercy swallowed hard. They said someone like me was born to take, born to ruin things." Silas's voice grew low. "They lied." For a long while, neither spoke. The horse climbed a narrow ridge, hooves finding their way through snow-brushed rock. Far above, smoke curled faintly into the sky. A thin gray ribbon from Silas's cabin, waiting for them like a promise. Silas finally said, "What's your name?" She hesitated, as though her name was something she ought to apologize for. "Mercy." The corner of Silas's mouth lifted in a way that almost resembled a smile. "Mercy," he repeated quietly. "A good name." She shivered, both from cold and from something else, something fragile, unfamiliar. "What's yours?" "Silas Thornwood." Her voice broke, thin with disbelief. "Why would a man like you help someone like me?" Silas took a slow breath. "Because someone like you didn't deserve what they did, and because someone like me should have been there sooner." Mercy turned her head slightly toward him, eyes glassy with the beginnings of tears. She whispered, "Thank you?" Silas looked at her, truly looked, and felt the weight of 20 years of solitude shift within him. "Save your thanks," he said. "You're not safe yet, but you will be." Ahead of them, the path bent toward the hidden cabin, where warmth waited and the world's cruelty couldn't follow. And for the first time in years, Silas felt as though he was riding toward something more than survival. The trail Silas chose was not one used by ranchers, soldiers, or even trappers. It was a path shaped by deer hooves and wind, a twisting ribbon through dark pines and granite slopes. The kind of path only a man who had lived half his life in the mountains would know. As his stallion climbed higher, Mercy leaned against him out of necessity, her body too weak to hold itself upright for long. Every breath she drew shuddered with cold and exhaustion. Silas pulled his bearskin coat wider, wrapping it around her shoulders so completely that she almost disappeared inside its heavy warmth. For a moment, she let her eyes close, letting the motion of the horse cradle her like a lullaby she hadn't known since childhood. But the silence between them soon felt too heavy, and she forced her voice into the cold air. Where are we going?" "To my place," Silas answered simply. "A cabin up the ridge." Mercy swallowed, her throat raw. Am I a burden?" Silas didn't answer quickly. His silence wasn't cruel. It was thoughtful. When he finally spoke, his voice held none of the judgment she was bracing for. "If you were a burden, I wouldn't be carrying you." His words were blunt, but something inside them softened her fear. Mercy lowered her head again, unsure how to respond. She had been called many things, useless, ugly, foolish, but never had anyone brushed aside her weight, her need, her presence so simply, as though caring for her was not a sacrifice, but a natural act. The horse continued its climb, hooves crunching over frost-hardened soil. Above them, clouds draped the mountain ridge like gray wool, and the first whispers of snowfall drifted through the air. Silas pulled Mercy a fraction closer. "You're freezing," he murmured. "I'm fine," she lied. Silas huffed in a way that almost resembled a laugh. "You're shaking so hard the horse thinks you're signaling him." Even through fear and exhaustion, Mercy felt a small, fragile warmth bloom inside her chest. No one had ever spoken to her like that. Not cruelly, not mockingly, but with quiet, tired humor, as though she belonged there in his arms, as though she were not an inconvenience to be tolerated, but a traveler he didn't mind carrying. An hour passed, maybe more. Mercy lost track of time as her head gently bumped against Silas's shoulder. Every so often, she mumbled an apology when she leaned too heavily on him. Each time, his response was the same, steady as bedrock. "Lean if you need to. I've got you." As the path narrowed along a steep ridge, Silas slowed the horse to a walk. The drop beside them was sharp enough to make Mercy's stomach twist. "Don't look down," Silas said softly. "I'm trying not to." "Good. Keep trying." Mercy clenched her eyes shut and focused on the steady, rhythmic rise and fall of Silas's breathing against her back. For a man of his size, he was remarkably calm. No tremor of fear, no hesitation. His confidence anchored her like a hand pressed gently between her shoulder blades. After a long silence, Mercy finally whispered, "Why were you out there today? No one uses that part of the border." Silas hesitated, a rare thing. His voice, when it came, was quieter than she expected. "I visit that land sometimes to remember the place my wife and daughter died." Mercy felt the air tighten around them. She didn't speak. She didn't dare. But Silas continued, as though the mountains had decided the story should be told. "My wife was named Hannah. My daughter Lily. We lived far from any town. Too far. When a hostile band came through, I wasn't home yet. The muscle in his jaw tightened. By the time I got back, it was already done. Mercy felt her chest ache. I'm so sorry. You have nothing to be sorry for. They said you lived alone for 20 years. Close enough. And the Tho Dan, some tribes trust me. I helped them once. They helped me bury my family. Mercy bowed her head. And today, you saw me the way you saw her. Silas stopped the horse. Mercy's breath caught. He didn't speak right away. Instead, he slid from the saddle and lifted her down with both arms as gently as if she were made of folded paper. Her feet trembled beneath her, and he steadied her by her elbows. You're wrong, he said softly. Mercy blinked, confused. Wrong? I didn't see Hannah, he said. I saw someone who needed help. Someone decent the world gave no mercy to. Hannah would have wanted me to stop. But I saved you because you were you. Mercy's throat tightened painfully. Before she could respond, Silas pointed toward a break in the trees. Through the heavy pines, a plume of smoke rose faintly from a stone chimney. Pick yourself up, he said gently. We're almost home. Home. The word settled into Mercy's heart like warm cloth. She followed him, step by step, her legs weak, but her spirit flickering with something she hadn't felt in years. Hope. The cabin appeared gradually out of the tree line, its silhouette rising from the slope like a memory carved into wood and stone. Smoke curled from the chimney, carrying the smell of burning pine, clean, crisp, almost sweet. Mercy paused just outside the clearing, caught between exhaustion and awe. She had expected a rough shelter, perhaps something half-collapsed after years of solitude. Instead, Silas had built a home meant to endure storms. Broad logs formed the walls, fitted so tightly not a breath of wind could slip through. Thick hides stretched across a wooden rack near the door. A small corral stood to the side, its rails sturdy and well kept. What struck Mercy most was the light inside the windows, warm, golden, steady. A light that suggested safety, something she had not felt in years. Silas opened the door and stepped aside. Go on, he said. Heat's better inside. Mercy crossed the threshold as though stepping into another world. The heat from the stone hearth washed over her immediately, thawing places inside her she hadn't realized were frozen. The interior was simple, but everything had a purpose. A long table of weathered oak, shelves filled with jars of dried herbs and smoked meats, a woven rug beneath the bed on the far side of the room. Nothing extravagant, yet nothing neglected. Silas closed the door softly. Sit, he said. Mercy did, sinking onto a bench near the fire. She held her hands toward the flames, watching the trembling in her fingers slowly fade. Silence stretched between them, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was simply the kind of quiet two people shared when words were too fragile. Silas ladled hot broth from a pot hanging above the fire and set it before her. Eat slow. Haven't had food in too long. Mercy obeyed. The soup tasted of venison, onion, and something earthy she couldn't name. Whatever it was, it warmed her from throat to belly, and she felt strength seeping back into her limbs. You made this? She asked softly. Silas shrugged. Been cooking for myself for 20 years. I manage. Mercy looked around the cabin again. It was clean, organized, lived in, yet cared for. She wondered how a man could build a life so alone and still keep it warm. After she finished the soup, Silas handed her a folded blanket. You'll sleep in the bed tonight. I'll take the chair. Mercy stared at him. You don't have to do that. Yes, I do. She began to protest, but he raised a hand. "You've been hurt. You need rest. I can sleep anywhere." His tone was firm, not harsh, just certain, and Mercy felt a wave of gratitude rise in her chest. She had spent her life being given scraps, insults, unwanted glances. This kind of respect was unfamiliar, almost overwhelming. Silas stoked the fire, adding a thick log. Sparks climbed upward, lighting the room in shifting amber. Mercy watched the way the flames painted his face, the strong line of his jaw, the silver threaded through his beard, the eyes that carried too much memory. "You must have been happy once," she said. His hand stilled on the poker. He didn't look at her. "Once. I'm sorry," she murmured. Silas set the poker aside and sat in the chair near the hearth. "Doesn't matter anymore?" "It does," she said quietly. He glanced at her then, just a flicker, but enough for Mercy to see something break open in him, something old and buried. She folded her hands in her lap. If you ever want to talk about her, I can listen." Silas didn't answer, but the firelight caught the corner of his mouth lifting in the smallest of smiles. Not happiness, but appreciation. Later that night, after Mercy washed her face and Silas stepped outside to bring in more firewood, she stood before the bed, unsure if she had the right to lie on something so clean, so soft. The mattress was stuffed with straw and pine needles, but covered with a thick quilt sewn with careful hands long ago. She ran her fingers over the stitches, imagining Silas's late wife working them into the fabric. When Silas returned, she whispered, "This was hers, wasn't it?" He nodded. "Hannah made it the winter before Lily was born. Are you sure you want me to use it?" "If she were here," he said softly, "she'd have covered you with it herself." Mercy's throat tightened. She lay down slowly, pulling the quilt over her weary body. Its warmth was immediate, but it was the weight, the sense of being held, that brought sudden tears to her eyes. Silas turned down the lamp, leaving only the fire's glow. "Get some sleep." The chair creaked as he settled into it. Mercy looked at him through the dim light. "Silas?" "You saved me." He didn't move. "Good night, Mercy." She slept deeper than she had in years. In the morning, the smell of frying meat and fresh coffee filled the cabin. Mercy blinked awake, surprised her body didn't ache the way she expected. Silas was at the stove, turning strips of venison with a wooden fork. The quiet domesticity of the scene tugged at something she didn't dare name. "Sit," he said without turning. Mercy smiled. "You always cook for your guests?" "Never had guests." "How many years?" "Too many." Mercy sat at the table. "Thank you for having me." Silas placed a tin plate before her. "Thank me when you're strong enough to walk on your own." They ate in silence, but it was the kind of silence that felt like company, not loneliness. After breakfast, Silas stepped outside to chop wood. Mercy watched through the window. His movements were deliberate, powerful, yet controlled. Each swing of the axe sent a clean crack through the air. He wasn't showing off. This was simply the way he existed. Steady, capable, alone. Mercy felt something shift inside her. Admiration was part of it. So was gratitude. But there was something else, something warm, dangerous, and deeply human. Something she thought she'd never feel. A soft knock startled her. Silas appeared in the doorway. "You feeling strong enough to help with chores?" he asked. Mercy stood, smoothing her dress. I want to repay your kindness." Silas paused, studying her with those quiet eyes. "You don't have to repay anything, "But I want to." He nodded once. "All right then, let's start slow." Outside, he showed her how to carry water from the creek, how to gather herbs drying on the rack, how to mend a small tear in one of his hides. He corrected her hands gently, never impatient, never criticizing. With each small task, Mercy felt herself returning to life, not the life she had known, but a new one forming quietly, softly, inside this cabin on the mountain. That evening, when they sat by the fire again, Silas handed her a cup of tea. Their fingers brushed, barely a touch, but enough for both to stiffen, startled by the spark between them. Mercy looked away first. I don't want to be a burden." Silas's voice dropped to a low, steady rumble. "You're not." "How do you know?" "Because my home hasn't felt like a home in 20 years, until now." Mercy's breath caught. Outside, the wind brushed against the mountains like a long, slow sigh, and inside the cabin, two lonely lives drew closer, inch by inch, toward something fragile, dangerous, and undeniably real. The weeks that followed settled into a rhythm almost too gentle for either of them to trust. Morning light touched the windows. Silas brewed coffee in the iron pot. Mercy swept the floor or stirred a pot of stew. Evenings ended with the two of them sitting near the fire, each pretending not to watch the other. It was a fragile peace, like a calm lake holding the memory of storms beneath its surface. One afternoon, a slow curtain of snow drifted across the ridge. Mercy was seated at the table mending one of Silas's gloves while he sorted through leather straps in the corner. It would have been an ordinary moment if not for the silence that felt heavier than usual. Without looking up, Mercy asked, "Silas, what happens when I'm well enough to return to Blackwater?" Silas didn't answer immediately. He set aside the strap he'd been holding, exhaled once, then said, "You're not going back." Mercy's hand stilled. "But they'll think I ran away. They'll say I'm hiding." "They already tried to kill you," Silas said. "There's nothing left for you there." Her needle slipped from her fingers. She stared toward the fire, its glow blurring as doubt filled her eyes. She had lived her entire life bending herself into the shape others dictated. Running was something she had never done, not because she didn't want to, but because she never believed she had the right. "Where will I go then?" she whispered. Silas stood slowly, as though measuring the weight of the next words. "You stay here as long as you choose." Mercy looked up sharply. "With you?" "With me," he confirmed. The words seemed simple, almost careless, but they weren't. Mercy felt them settle in her like warm stones. She tried to speak, but before she could gather breath, the wind outside shifted. A bird shrieked from the treetops, sharp, frantic, a warning. Silas was at the window instantly, parting the hide curtain just enough to see the slope below the cabin. His voice dropped. "Riders." Mercy rose to her feet. "Who?" Silas didn't turn. "3 men, armed." Fear climbed Mercy's spine, cold and swift. She stepped closer, gripping the back of the chair. "Are they from Blackwater?" "Likely," Silas murmured. "Townfolk don't come this far unless they're tracking something." "Tracking me?" Silas finally turned to her, and in his eyes she saw the steel he kept hidden beneath gentleness. "Tracking trouble." He crossed the cabin, lifted his rifle from the wall, checked the chamber, then handed Mercy a small revolver. Her fingers trembled so badly she almost dropped it. "I don't know how to use this," she confessed. "Yes, you do," Silas said. "I've shown you, and you listen sharper than you think." Before she could protest, hooves thudded outside. Voices carried up the slope. "Thornwood! We know she's in there. Hand the girl over, and we'll make this easy." Mercy's pulse hammered in her ears. She stepped backward until her shoulders brushed the wall. Silas didn't move from the door, his voice lowered to something dark and old. "You stay behind me, no matter what." The door shook under a sudden blow. Mercy flinched. A man outside shouted, "The mayor says she stole from him. She belongs to Blackwater Justice." Mercy's voice broke. "Silas, I didn't—" "I know," he said, cutting her off gently. "Truth doesn't matter to men like them." The door rattled again. Silas lifted the bar from behind the hinges, opening the door a crack before pushing it fully outward. Snow whirled in around him, settling on his shoulders like ash. 3 riders stared back, faces twisted with the certainty of men who believed their cruelty was lawful. The man in the middle pointed his gun toward Silas's chest. "Move aside. We just want the girl." "You can't have her." The man sneered. "You're harboring a criminal." Silas stepped forward, the rifle steady in his hands. "I'm harboring someone who's suffered enough." A tense stillness followed. 3 guns raised toward one man who didn't back down. Mercy pressed her fist to her mouth, her breath caught somewhere between terror and disbelief. She had never seen anyone defend her, never seen anyone call her worth protecting. The man on the left laughed. "Look at you, Thornwood, playing hero for a fat thief?" Before Mercy could recoil, Silas's voice cut through the cold. "Say that again." The laughter faltered. Silas's eyes, blue-gray and unblinking, held all the weight of a man who had outlived grief, war, and wilderness. "Say her name if you know it, but don't call her that." The insult hung in the air like smoke. The men shifted uneasily. The leader spat snow from his lip. "Last warning. Give her up or we burn you out." Silas didn't move. Mercy saw the truth then. He wasn't afraid. Not of them. Not of death. The only thing he feared was repeating the past, failing to save someone he'd sworn to protect. She stepped forward despite her shaking knees, standing just behind Silas's shoulder. "I'm here," she said, her voice breaking. "If you want me, speak to me." "Get back," Silas murmured. "No," she whispered. "Not this time. Not again." Silas didn't look at her, but a muscle in his jaw tightened. This wasn't courage born from strength. It was courage born from a woman who had nothing left to lose, yet chose to stand beside him. The leader raised his pistol. "Move aside!" Silas raised his rifle at the same moment. But before either could fire, a loud crack split the air, an arrow burying itself in the snow between the riders' horses. The men jerked back in surprise. Another arrow whistled, landing beside the first. A third followed. The forest had gone silent, but the silence had changed. Heavier, waiting. Silas didn't turn, but Mercy saw recognition flicker across his face. From the tree line, shapes emerged, 2, 3, 5, warriors of the Mountain Crow tribe, faces painted, bows drawn, watching the riders with cold, precise judgment. The leader of the warriors stepped forward. His voice carried clearly. "Thornwood is under our protection. The woman in his home is under his." Silas exhaled once, the smallest release of tension. The riders hesitated, weighing their odds. Then, one by one, they cursed under their breath, yanked their reins, and rode downhill, defeated but not repentant. Silas closed the cabin door when the sound of hoofbeats faded. The revolver slipped from Mercy's hand, clattering to the floor. Silas caught her before she collapsed. "Easy," It's over." She buried her face against his chest, unable to stop the shaking. "They were going to kill you because of me." Silas held her, one hand cupping the back of her head. "Then they would have had to bury me on my own land. I won't lose someone again." Mercy clung to him, the truth settling like a stone in her heart. She wasn't a burden. She wasn't a hostage. She was someone worth fighting for. The next morning dawned gray and hollow, the kind of morning the mountains used to warn travelers to turn back. Silas stood outside splitting wood, his shoulders stiff from the strain of the previous day's standoff. Mercy watched him from the doorway, one hand pressed lightly against the frame. She could see the pain he refused to mention, tucked beneath the firm set of his jaw. "You should rest," she said softly. He lowered the axe, planting it in the chopping block. "Too much to do. You hurt." He glanced at her then, the corner of his mouth tilting in a way that wasn't quite a smile. "I've been hurt before." Mercy stepped outside, her shoes sinking into the cold ground. She reached him slowly, as if approaching a skittish animal. "Not like this," she murmured. "Not because of me." Silas turned fully now, brushing snow from his shoulders. "Yesterday wasn't your fault. Men like those have been itching for a fight since long before you ever crossed their path." Mercy opened her mouth to argue, but a sudden snap of a branch echoed from the trees. Both froze. Silas's hand drifted to the rifle leaning against the wall. Mercy felt her breath catch. Silas whispered, "Inside, now." Mercy didn't move. "No, if something's coming, I'm staying with you." He almost told her no again, but something in her eyes, steady, unflinching, silenced him. He nodded once. From the tree line stepped the one man neither of them expected to see. The mayor of Blackwater, Whitmore himself, coat flapping in the wind, face red with rage, a pistol clutched in his trembling hand. Silas instantly lifted the rifle. "Stop right there." Whitmore laughed, a thin, cracking sound. "Thornwood, you think yesterday scared me? You and your little band of savages?" Silas didn't rise to the bait. "Put the gun down." But Whitmore's eyes weren't on Silas. They were locked on Mercy. "You," he hissed, "do you know what you've caused? My town is laughing at me. They think I'm weak, letting a fat thief run off with a hermit." Mercy stepped forward before Silas could stop her. "I never stole anything from you." "You stole food," Whitmore snapped. "Food from my wife's shop." Mercy swallowed. "It was thrown out. I only took what was already trash. I was hungry. I wasn't trying to hurt anyone." Whitmore spat into the snow. "Trash or not, you touched something that wasn't yours. That makes you property of the law. My law." Silas moved slightly in front of her. "She's not going anywhere with you." Whitmore raised his pistol. "Oh, she will, dead or alive." What happened next unfolded as if time bent around the moment. Whitmore fired first. Silas pushed Mercy down and returned the shot in the same breath. Two gun cracks echoed across the trees. Whitmore stumbled back, clutching his arm, but not defeated. With his uninjured hand, he reached inside his coat. Mercy saw the glint of metal before Silas did. "Silas!" She threw herself against him, knocking him aside just as Whitmore hurled a knife straight toward Silas's chest. The blade sliced Mercy's shoulder instead. She gasped, falling to her knees. Silas roared, an animal sound torn from somewhere deep and buried. He charged forward with a fury Mercy had never seen, disarming Whitmore, slamming him into the snow, and pinning him with the weight of a man who had spent half his life surviving the wild. Whitmore struggled desperately. You're attacking an elected official. You attacked her, Silas growled. Mercy held her bleeding shoulder, watching as Silas's anger trembled on the edge of something dangerous. She whispered, "Silas, don't kill him." For a long moment it seemed he wouldn't hear her. Then he turned his head. Mercy's eyes met his, soft, pained, pleading, and Silas froze. Slowly, he released the mare and stood. Whitmore scrambled backward, shaking. "This isn't over," he rasped. "Blackwater will come for her. For both of you." Silas stepped forward once, just enough to make Whitmore flinch. "No, you come up this mountain again, and I'll bury you before the snow melts." Whitmore fled into the trees, clutching his wounded arm. Silas rushed to Mercy, kneeling beside her. "Let me see." She winced as he inspected the wound. "It's not deep," he murmured. "Hurts like hell, but you'll be all right." Her breath shook. "I didn't want you to die. I couldn't let you." Silas pressed his forehead to hers, voice low and raw. "I'm not losing you, Mercy. Not ever." She leaned into him, the cold, forgotten. But both knew the truth. Blackwater had crossed a line, and they would cross it again. Silas might have won the battle, but the war was coming. Night came softly over the ridge, as if the sky were laying a heavy blanket across the world. The fire in the cabin crackled low, casting warm, unsteady light along the walls. Mercy sat at the edge of the bed, her shoulder wrapped in clean cloth, her breath finally steady again. Silas moved quietly around the room, stirring the embers, checking the latch on the door, glancing toward her every few seconds without meaning to. He wasn't a man who fussed. He wasn't a man who knew how to. Yet tonight, every movement he made circled back to her. "You should lie down," he murmured. Mercy smiled faintly. "If I lie down now, I'll fall asleep before I thank you." Silas stopped, turning slowly, as if the simple words had struck deeper than a bullet. He sat beside her on the bed, careful not to jostle her arm. For a long time, neither spoke. There was no rush. Life in the mountains taught patience, and the fire never hurried its burn. Finally, Mercy said, "You could have died today." "So could you," he answered. "That's different." "No," he said softly, "it isn't." Mercy looked at him, really looked, at the roughness of his beard, the snow still melting in his hair, the lines carved by years of loneliness. "Why?" she whispered. "Why did you fight so hard for me?" Silas exhaled, every breath carrying the weight of years he'd never spoken aloud. "Because the world took too much from me already. I wasn't about to let it take you, too." She blinked slowly, overwhelmed by the way his words came not as grand declarations, but as simple truth. Truth he had carried in silence far too long. "I don't know what I am to you," she whispered. "A burden? A reminder of someone you lost? Or just someone who needed saving?" Silas turned to her fully, his eyes warm with something steady and unashamed. "You're not Hannah," he said gently. "You're Mercy, a woman with her own strength, her own scars, her own way of stitching light back into a place I thought would stay dark forever." Her breath trembled. Silas reached for her hand, not taking it, just offering his palm near hers, waiting. When she placed her fingers in his, he clasped them with the care of a man afraid to break something precious. "You're safe here," he said. The words were simple, but simple words often held the truest things. Mercy felt tears warm her cheeks. She leaned lightly against his shoulder, letting the quiet settle around them like a second blanket. Outside, the wind brushed against the cabin walls. Inside, the two of them sat close enough to feel each other's breath, far enough to still be shy about it. After a long while, Mercy whispered, Do you think something good can come out of all this? Silas didn't promise. He didn't paint hopeful pictures. He wasn't a man of grand speeches, but he rested his cheek gently against the top of her head, held her hand a little tighter, and said the one truth he believed. It's your home now, if you'll have it. Mercy closed her eyes, tears slipping quietly. Outside the mountains waited. Blackwater whispered threats. Winter thickened its grip. But inside the small cabin, two people who had lived too long in loneliness allowed themselves the smallest, most dangerous thing on the frontier: hope. Every time your voices reach me in the comments, whether from Texas plains, Montana snowfields, or small towns halfway across the world, I'm reminded of how stories travel farther than footsteps ever could. They find us where we sit, quiet and tired at day's end, and they bind us together for a moment. Tell me where you're listening from tonight. Tell me if Mercy and Silas's journey touched something in you, and if you still believe love can rise from the hardest winters. Stay with me, because the next story is already waiting to be told. Daddy, she looks like my dream angel. 4-year-old said about fat Obese, woman to mountain man. The summer sun over Copper Ridge burned hot enough to bleach wooden signboards and dry the dust into a fine red powder that clung to every boot crossing the town square. Yet the brightness did nothing to soften the cruelty unfolding near the produce stalls. Look at her, a sharp, icy voice snapped across the market. She's a disgrace to this town. A ring of well-dressed women, draped in lace parasols and shimmering brooches, closed in around a single young woman clutching a frayed wicker basket. Her dress, a faded blue calico, tugged awkwardly across her soft frame. Mud clung to the hem. Her cheeks were flushed, not from shame alone, but from trying desperately not to cry. Her name was Evangeline Hart, 28 years old, orphaned, and far too gentle for a place like Copper Ridge. The leader of the circle, Constance Alderwood, the mayor's wife, lifted her chin with theatrical disgust. Who told you you could shop at the morning market? Have some decency and stay out of sight. The children shouldn't be forced to look at that. The other women laughed, cruel and shrill. One woman tossed a bruised turnip at Evangeline's feet. Another pushed her shoulder just hard enough to send her stumbling. Evangeline bent quickly to pick up the scattered carrots from her basket, hoping, praying, they would walk away if she made herself small enough. They didn't. Constance stepped forward. Crawl home, girl. At least then we won't have to watch the ground sink under you. A harsh shove sent Evangeline sprawling into the dirt. Her knees hit first. Her palms followed. She bit her lip, trying not to sob. The laughter rose even higher, but not all eyes in the market were filled with mockery. From beside a supply wagon, a small voice whispered, Daddy, that's her. Josiah McKenna, broad-shouldered, sun-weathered, 35, and feared by half the mountain, paused mid-stride. His 4-year-old daughter, Emma, tugged at his coat, eyes wide as lantern glass. That's the angel, Emma breathed. The angel from my dream. Josiah frowned, crouching beside her. Your dream, sweetheart? Emma nodded, curls bouncing. The angel with brown hair and sad eyes. The one who said she was coming. She said she was going to be my new mama. Josiah's chest tightened. He opened his mouth to gently correct her, then saw Evangeline push herself up from the dirt, trembling, trying to gather what dignity she could. And something inside him shifted, because Emma wasn't wrong. There was something angelic about the way the woman stood again despite being crushed, something fragile, hurting, and impossibly brave. Before he knew it, Emma slipped from his grasp, running straight toward Evangeline. "Are you okay?" the little girl asked, small hand reaching out. Evangeline blinked through tears, and for the first time that morning, she managed to smile. And Josiah, watching from a distance, felt the moment carve itself into his heart. Evangeline had never in her life seen a child approach her without hesitation. Most children in Copper Ridge were taught by whispers from their mothers, by looks from their fathers, that she was someone to avoid, someone to mock, someone to blame for, well, anything. But Emma McKenna looked at her as though she were sunlight made real. Evangeline knelt instinctively, brushing dirt from her skirt before wiping her eyes. "I'm all right, sweetheart. Thank you." Emma tilted her head thoughtfully. "You look just like her." "Like who?" "My dream angel," Emma said, completely certain, as if announcing the color of the sky. Before Evangeline could respond, a shadow stretched across the ground beside them. Josiah McKenna stepped forward. He moved with the quiet weight of a man who had carried too much grief across too many seasons. His shoulders were broad beneath his weathered coat, and his jaw was darkened with stubble, framing a face equal parts sternness and sorrow. His hands, large, calloused, familiar with axe handles and rifle grips, hung still at his sides, though the tension in them was visible. His eyes, gray like mountain storms, were fixed on Evangeline. He'd seen the entire scene. He had watched her fall, watched her try not to cry, watched his daughter choose her without hesitation, and something in him, something long dormant, cracked. "I'm sorry for what they did." Josiah's voice was deep, steady, the kind that could split a log or soothe a frightened child. "No one should have treated you like that." Evangeline shook her head quickly. "You don't have to apologize. It happens all the time." Emma's small hand clutched Evangeline's dress. "She shouldn't be alone, Daddy. Angels shouldn't cry." A tiny, tremulous laugh escaped Evangeline's lips, though tears threatened again. Josiah crouched beside them, lowering himself to eye level. Up close, Evangeline noticed the faint lines at the corners of his eyes, the marks grief leaves behind. She'd seen those same lines on men burying their wives, on fathers leaving the graves of children too small to be lowered into the ground. "You're hurt," Josiah murmured, nodding at the smear of blood on her palm. "It's nothing," she whispered. "Really." Emma gasped dramatically. "Daddy, she's bleeding. We have to fix her, right?" Josiah exhaled a breath that felt heavier than his coat. "That's right, honey." He turned back to Evangeline. "Look, I don't mean to overstep, but if you'd allow it, Emma and I live just outside town. We have warm water, clean towels, food. You don't need to stay out here being humiliated." Evangeline stiffened. "Oh, I can't. I can't be a burden to anyone." "You wouldn't be," he said firmly, surprising even himself with how certain he felt. "Besides, Emma seems to have already made up her mind." Emma nodded so hard her bow nearly fell off. "Daddy said I can't talk to strangers, but angels don't count. And you're my angel." "Emma," Josiah muttered under his breath, cheeks warming, "she's not an angel." "Yes, she is," Emma countered. "God sent her, just like Mary said." Evangeline blinked. "Mary? Your wife?" Josiah's gaze flickered. A wound reopened in that tiny movement. "She passed," he said quietly. 2 years ago." Emma pressed her cheek against Evangeline's arm. Mama said before she went to heaven that she'd send someone to help us not be lonely. And then I dreamed about her, the angel with brown hair and soft eyes. That's you." Evangeline felt her heart push hard against her ribs. No one had ever spoken about her like this. No one had ever seen softness in her. No one had ever believed she could be a blessing instead of a burden. The noise of the marketplace faded. The whispers of mockery dissolved. The morning sunlight warmed her face. She found herself whispering, If you're sure it's not an inconvenience, then maybe just for lunch. I don't want to intrude." Emma squealed, wrapping her arms around Evangeline's waist. "She's coming home with us. Daddy, she said yes." Josiah rose, offering a steady hand to help Evangeline stand. She hesitated, then placed her hand in his. His grip was gentle, warm, far steadier than she'd expected. "We won't keep you long," he said quietly. "Just long enough to make sure you're safe and treated the way you deserve." Evangeline swallowed hard. No one had ever used the word deserve with her in a kind way. As she climbed into the wagon beside Emma and Josiah, leaving behind the market where she'd been humiliated, she wondered, could a single child's dream truly change the course of a woman's life? Josiah flicked the reins. The wagon lurched forward. Evangeline glanced at him. He was staring straight ahead, jaw tight, hand steady. But beneath that rough mountain exterior, she saw it, a softness, a longing, a man who wasn't expecting anything to change, until a little girl claimed an angel for a mother. The wagon creaked as it left the marketplace behind, rolling toward the open fields and the mountains rising like ancient guardians on the horizon. The deeper they went, the quieter the world became. The town's cruelty faded into the distance until it was nothing more than a cold echo. Evangeline sat between Josiah and Emma, hands folded tightly in her lap. She tugged nervously at the sleeve of Mary's old shawl, soft wool, lavender-scented, lovingly mended. She felt unworthy of wearing anything that had belonged to a woman so deeply cherished. But Emma had insisted, and Josiah hadn't objected. The silence stretched gently at first, until Emma broke it with one simple question. "Do angels get hungry?" Evangeline blinked. I suppose even angels might get hungry after a long morning." Emma gasped. "Daddy, we have to feed her." Josiah huffed a laugh, short but warm. "We're headed home for lunch, sweetheart." Evangeline smiled, though she kept her eyes low. She didn't dare meet Josiah's gaze yet, not when her heart was beating too loudly, too foolishly. She was just a guest, a stranger, someone who'd stumbled into their lives for a moment. She needed to remember that. But when she risked a glance at Emma, nestled close, leaning against her side as though she belonged there, Evangeline felt her walls tremble. The road climbed steadily, turning from open dirt to winding forest trail. Pine trees rose like green cathedrals around them, their branches whispering secrets overhead. A cool breeze carried the scent of snowmelt and wood smoke. Josiah cleared his throat softly. "Do you come to town often?" Evangeline hesitated. "Only when I have to. I do chores at the church, sometimes laundry for families who, well, tolerate me." Emma frowned. "Why wouldn't they like you?" Evangeline breathed slowly. "Some people don't understand that bodies come in different shapes. They think being bigger makes someone less worthy." Emma blinked at her as though she'd said the sky was green. "But that doesn't make sense. You're soft like a pillow. Soft things are the best." Josiah coughed hard, clearly hiding a laugh. Emma! What? It's true, the girl insisted. Evangeline tried not to smile but failed. Thank you, Emma. You're very kind. The little girl beamed. Josiah shifted on the bench, the leather creaking beneath him. She doesn't mean just your softness. She means you're gentle. Evangeline looked at him, really looked, and saw sincerity, not pity, in his storm-gray eyes. Her breath caught. No man had ever spoken about her that way. Before she could respond, the wagon struck a rut. Evangeline lurched, her balance slipping, but Josiah's hand shot out instantly, steadying her. His calloused fingers wrapped around her wrist, warm and protective. Careful, he murmured. Her pulse fluttered. Thank you. He released her slowly, reluctantly, as though surprised by his own hesitation. The wagon continued up the trail, wheels crunching over fallen needles and bits of old snow. A deer bounded across the path ahead, ears twitching. Emma squealed in delight and leaned against Evangeline again. I wish Mama could see this, she whispered. She used to sing to the deer. Evangeline stroked her hair gently. She must have been a wonderful woman. She was, Josiah said quietly. She was gentle, brave, and she loved Emma fiercely. And you? Evangeline asked without thinking. Too soft, too soon. Josiah didn't answer right away. I loved her more than anything, he finally said, and losing her, it nearly broke me. Evangeline lowered her gaze. I'm sorry. He nodded once, appreciating the softness of her tone. Emma, innocent, unfiltered, added, Mama told me before she went to heaven that my new mama would be soft too, because soft women hug better. Daddy, do you think she meant Evangeline? Josiah's hands tightened on the reins. Emma, he said gently, don't rush things. But Daddy, Emma protested, she looks like the angel from my dream. Evangeline's cheeks burned. Emma, dreams don't always mean what we think. But mine do, Emma said matter-of-factly. The forest thinned, revealing a clearing with a small cabin nestled at its center. Smoke curled from the chimney. Chickens scratched the ground near the fence. Wildflowers swayed gently around the porch. Evangeline stared. It was beautiful, warm, lived in, loved, a home. Josiah guided the wagon to a stop. We're here. Emma jumped down, running toward the cabin. I'll get towels and the good plates. Daddy said we only use them for special people. Josiah's ears turned pink. Evangeline pretended not to notice. She stepped down carefully, but the wagon's height made her wobble. Josiah was beside her in an instant, one hand steadying her back, the other holding her arm. I've got you, he said softly. Evangeline swallowed, acutely aware of how close he was. I'm not used to being caught, she whispered. His expression shifted, softening, deepening. Then you've been around the wrong people. He released her slowly, as though reluctant again. Inside the cabin, Emma darted around excitedly. Sit by the fire, Mama. Josiah froze. Evangeline froze. Emma slapped her hands over her mouth. Oh, I mean, sit by the fire, Evangeline. Evangeline's heart clenched at the accidental title. Josiah rubbed his face. Emma, sweetheart, let's not— It's all right, Evangeline whispered. It didn't hurt. She sat near the hearth as Josiah prepared lunch. Bread, venison stew, roasted carrots. The warmth of the fire wrapped around her like an embrace. She closed her eyes. For the first time in years, she felt safe. She felt wanted. She felt seen. Emma climbed into her lap without asking, curling against her as though she'd always belonged there. Josiah watched from the kitchen, watched his daughter lean into this woman, watched Evangeline hold her with gentle certainty, watched something fill the empty spaces of their home. Maybe he wasn't ready. Maybe he didn't believe in second chances. Maybe he feared loving again. But as he looked at Evangeline framed by the firelight, arms wrapped around Emma like she'd been born to hold her, Josiah wondered if a child's dream saw truths that grown men had forgotten how to recognize. The first real silence Evangeline experienced that day came not from fear, but from peace. Inside Josiah's cabin, the world felt different. The walls, built from timber he had cut himself, carried the scent of pine and old smoke. A woven rug, faded but lovingly patched, lay near the hearth. Above it hung a collection of wooden toys Josiah had carved: a tiny horse, a bear, a doll with braided hair. Emma's treasures. It was a home, a real one, the kind Evangeline hadn't known since she was a child. "Sit here," Emma insisted, dragging a rocking chair close to the fire. "Daddy made it for Mama when she was sick. Now it can be yours." Josiah gently touched his daughter's shoulder. "Emma, we take things slow, remember?" Emma huffed dramatically the way only a 4-year-old could. "But she fits." Evangeline lowered herself into the chair, feeling the soft creak beneath her. "It's beautiful," she murmured. "Your mother must have loved it." Josiah's voice softened. "She did." The stew simmered in the iron pot, filling the cabin with a warm, savory aroma. Josiah ladled it into bowls, while Emma excitedly placed mismatched plates on the table, exactly 3 of them. Evangeline rose to help, but Josiah stopped her with a raised hand. "You're our guest today. Let me do this." "I don't want to be trouble," she whispered. "You're not." The certainty in his voice startled her. When they sat down at the table, Emma insisted they hold hands to pray. Evangeline hesitated. No one had ever wanted to hold her hand during grace, but Emma grabbed hers without a second thought. Josiah took Evangeline's other hand. His palm was warm, steady. Hers trembled. "Lord," Emma began, eyes squeezed shut, "thank you for sending my dream angel. Please let her stay forever. Amen." Josiah choked. Evangeline nearly dropped her spoon. "Emma," he groaned, turning red. "What?" "It's true," she insisted. Evangeline fought a smile. "You're very sweet, Emma." The stew was delicious, rich, perfectly seasoned, deeply comforting. Evangeline couldn't help closing her eyes with the first bite. "This is wonderful." "Venison Mary taught me to make," Josiah said quietly. "I haven't cooked it for anyone besides Emma since—" He didn't finish. He didn't have to. Evangeline set her spoon down gently. "Thank you for sharing it with me." Her voice was soft, but the gratitude in it ran deep. After lunch, Emma grabbed Evangeline's hand. "Come, I want to show you my favorite place." Josiah raised a brow. "Stay close to the cabin." "We will," Emma promised, dragging Evangeline outside. Behind the cabin lay a small clearing where wildflowers grew in clusters. Pink, yellow, lavender. Emma plopped herself down in the middle of them and started braiding stems clumsily. "Mama used to do this. I'm not as good, but Daddy says I'm getting better." Evangeline sat beside her. "They're beautiful." Emma lifted her head, eyes bright. "Do you like being here?" Evangeline looked around. The whispering pines, the sunlight resting gently on the field, the cabin standing like a silent guardian. "Yes," she said truthfully, "more than anywhere I've been." Emma grinned. "Good, because you're going to live with us." "Emma," Josiah called from the porch, exasperated. "I'm just saying what God said," Emma called back. Josiah sighed into his hands. Evangeline tried to hide a laugh. As afternoon shadows lengthened, Josiah joined them outside. He handed Evangeline a warm shawl, thick wool, worn soft with use. "It gets cool in the evening," he murmured. She held the shawl to her chest, startled by the tenderness in the gesture. "Thank you." "You're welcome." Their eyes met, briefly but intensely, and she felt warmth spread through her, deeper than the shawl could offer. "Daddy," Emma tugged Josiah's sleeve, "can we show her the animals?" He smiled faintly. "If she wants to." Evangeline nodded. "I'd love to." Behind the cabin were a few chickens, a goat named Mulligan, and a donkey that brayed indignantly when Emma attempted to hug him. Evangeline laughed, a soft, breathy sound that caught Josiah off guard. He watched her from a few steps back, arms folded. "You're good with her?" he said quietly. Evangeline brushed her hair behind her ear. "I like children. They're kinder than adults." "Emma certainly is," Josiah agreed. Then, after a moment, "She doesn't open up easily. She clung to Mary every day. After Mary died, she didn't speak to anyone besides me for weeks." Evangeline turned slowly. "And now? Now she talks your ear off," he murmured. "That means something." Evangeline felt her breath slip. He wasn't flirting. He wasn't exaggerating. He was simply telling the truth. And the truth warmed her more than the fire ever could. As the sun dipped behind the mountain ridge, casting golden light across the clearing, Josiah lit the lanterns inside the cabin. The soft glow filled the space with gentle warmth. Evangeline helped Emma wash up, braid her hair, and tuck her into her small bed beneath a quilt stitched with care. "Will you sing to me?" Emma asked. Evangeline blinked. I haven't sung in years." "Please." Josiah leaned in the doorway. "If you want to, it would mean a lot to her." So she sang, soft, trembling at first, then steadier. A lullaby her own mother used to sing, a melody of comfort and belonging. Josiah watched her with an expression she couldn't understand, half awe, half ache. When Emma finally drifted to sleep, Evangeline stepped quietly into the main room. Josiah sat by the fire, sharpening a carving tool. He looked up as she approached. "You're an angel," he whispered before he could stop himself. Evangeline froze. "I'm not." "Emma thinks you are." Evangeline swallowed. "And you?" Josiah set the tool down, meeting her gaze with startling intensity. "I think you're something I haven't seen in a long time." "What's that?" "Kindness." She blinked rapidly as emotion tightened her chest. He gestured to the rocking chair. "Sit. Rest." She sat across from him, firelight flickering over both their faces. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then Josiah exhaled, deep and heavy. "I don't know what happens next. I don't know what you want. But this place, this cabin, is safe for you, as long as you need it." Her voice trembled. I don't want to leave." His eyes softened. "Then don't." The fire cracked softly, filling the silence with warmth. Evangeline felt it then, not just safety, not just kindness. Hope, the kind that grows quietly in the spaces where a heart has been bruised too many times. The kind that feels like the beginning of something real. For a few blissful weeks, life in the cabin settled into a gentle rhythm. Mornings began with the smell of coffee and the sound of Emma's tiny footsteps scurrying across wooden floors. Evangeline helped gather eggs, sweep the porch, or hang laundry where the wind could catch it. Josiah chopped wood, fixed tools, hunted when needed, and every so often she caught him watching her with an expression too soft for a man who'd sworn he could never love again. But peace on the mountain never lasted long. Their first sign of trouble arrived in the form of a stranger's footprints in the snow. Josiah found them early one morning before sunrise, each step pressed fresh and deep along the tree line. Large, heavy, not Emma's, not Evangeline's, not his. He crouched, jaw tight. Someone's been here. Evangeline froze, clutching the shawl around her shoulders. Do you think— I'm not sure yet, he cut in gently, but I don't like it. He didn't tell Emma. He didn't want her frightened. But that night, when he stacked logs beside the fire, he kept his rifle propped within arm's reach. And Evangeline noticed. She always noticed him now. That evening, after Emma fell asleep, Evangeline stepped outside, needing air. Snowflakes drifted softly around her. The world was quiet, except for a snap of a twig. She spun, heart pounding. Josiah? But it wasn't his voice that answered. Evangeline! She froze. Out from behind a pine tree emerged a man she knew far too well, lean, sharp-eyed, with a smile like a blade. Matthew Keene, the sheriff's deputy, the man who had taunted her for years, the man who had told the town she was too big to be seen in public without blocking the sun. "What are you doing here?" she whispered. He smirked. "Came to check on you. Folks in town are saying you ran off with that mountain widower. Thought maybe he'd locked you up." Her blood ran cold. "He would never—" "Oh, I don't care what he does," Matthew sneered. "I care that you left. You're supposed to stay where you belong, out of sight." She trembled. "Go away." "Why?" he challenged, stepping closer. "Because you think that man actually wants you here? Come on, Evangeline. He's lonely, sure. But a woman like you?" His eyes dragged over her figure with cruel precision. "You think he'd ever choose that?" A familiar shame burned low in her chest. She backed away. "Josiah asked me to stay." Matthew's grin widened. "Maybe, for now, but men like him, they always change their minds." Another twig snapped, but this time the sound was heavier, stronger. Matthew's grin faltered. Josiah stepped out of the shadows behind the cabin. He looked nothing like the quiet, gentle father Evangeline knew. His shoulders were squared, his jaw clenched. His rifle hung loose in his hand, but the steel in his eyes was unmistakable. "Get away from her!" Matthew swallowed. "Josiah, now calm down. I was just checking—" "I don't care what you think you were doing." Josiah stepped between them, shielding Evangeline completely. "You don't come to my home, you don't speak to her, and you sure as hell don't threaten her." Matthew raised his hands. "This is public land, McKenna. I can stand anywhere I—" Josiah cocked the rifle. Matthew stumbled back. "You're making a mistake." "Am I?" "You really think she belongs here?" Matthew hissed. "She's nothing but—" "You finish that sentence," Josiah growled, "and you won't walk down this mountain." Matthew's mouth snapped shut. Josiah jerked his chin toward the trail. "Leave." For once, the deputy obeyed. He disappeared into the trees, crunching through snow at a near run. Only when his footsteps faded did Josiah lower the rifle. He turned to Evangeline. Her hands were trembling. She wasn't crying, not exactly, but she looked as though someone had reached into her chest and twisted something fragile. Josiah stepped closer, his voice low. "Did he hurt you?" "No," she whispered. "Did he touch you?" She shook her head. "Then what did he say?" Evangeline forced a laugh, thin, brittle. "Nothing I haven't heard before." Josiah's jaw tightened. "From who?" She swallowed hard. "Everyone. People in town, families I worked for, boys when I was younger, people like him." People like him don't define you. But they've always said the same things. Her voice cracked. That I'm too much, too big, too ugly, too inconvenient, that no decent man would ever want me. She hesitated. That I don't belong anywhere. Josiah went still, as though someone had rooted him to the earth. Slowly, deliberately, he reached out and cupped her cheek with one rough, warm hand. You belong here. Her breath hitched. With Emma, he continued softly. With me. His voice deepened. You hear me? You belong here. Tears filled her eyes, spilling silently down her cheeks. She turned her face into his palm, her body trembling with the weight of years of cruelty unraveling at once. I'm scared, she whispered. What if the town tries to take Emma from me? What if they say I'm not good enough to be near her? Josiah shook his head. They don't get to say a damn thing. His thumb brushed her cheek. Emma loves you. I trust you. That's all that matters. But Matthew won't be back, Josiah said sharply. Not after tonight. A cold wind blew between them, but Josiah didn't move his hand, didn't step away, didn't give her space to retreat into fear. Instead, he leaned in, slowly, giving her every chance to pull back. She didn't. Evangeline, he murmured, voice low as thunder, I need you to understand something. She lifted her gaze to his. There is nothing about you that makes you unwanted, he said. Nothing. Her breath trembled. How do you know? Because for the first time in 2 years, he whispered, I'm feeling something I didn't think I could feel again. The words hit her like a sunrise. Josiah! He stepped even closer, snowflakes catching in his beard. Don't let men like him decide your worth. They don't see you, not truly. And you do? She asked softly. I'm trying. His voice roughened. And every day I see more. She didn't know whether to cry or smile, so she did both. He slid his hand down to take hers, steady, grounding, warm. Come inside, he murmured. Emma will worry if we're out too long. They walked toward the cabin together, not touching beyond their joined hands, but somehow closer than they had ever been. Inside, the fire lamps glowed softly. Outside, the tracks in the snow from Matthew's boots began to fill with fresh snowfall, slowly erasing the shadow he'd brought with him. Josiah shut the door behind them. Evangeline felt the shift in the air. Tonight, something had changed. Not just the threat that had emerged, not just the fear that lingered, but the bond between them, something deeper than fear, older than loneliness, stronger than the world's cruelty, had finally begun to solidify. And neither of them could pretend otherwise anymore. The storm arrived before sunrise, one of those brutal mountain storms that swallowed the sky whole. Wind rattled the shutters. Snow slammed against the roof in heavy sheets. The cabin groaned under nature's weight. Josiah woke first. Something wasn't right. The air carried a strange tension, a wrongness, like the mountain itself was holding its breath. He slipped out of bed, careful not to wake Emma or Evangeline, who slept curled protectively beside the little girl. He grabbed his coat, lit a lantern, and stepped onto the porch. Tracks, boot prints, 3 sets, leading straight toward the cabin. Josiah's breath froze in his throat. Matthew hadn't come alone this time. He rushed back inside, bolting the door behind him. Evangeline, he whispered urgently, shaking her shoulder. Wake up. Her eyes flew open at the tone he never used, not with her, not with Emma, not with anyone, unless danger was already at the door. What's wrong? Someone's here, he murmured. More than one. Emma stirred, rubbing her eyes. Daddy? It's all right, sweetheart. Josiah lifted her, placing her gently behind the bed. But I need you to stay quiet, okay? Stay still. Emma nodded, sensing the seriousness in his voice. Evangeline moved beside them, fear trembling through her voice. Matthew? Matthew and friends. The pounding came seconds later. A fist slammed into the cabin door so hard the hinges shook. McKenna! Matthew's voice, muffled but furious. Come out! We're ending this! Josiah grabbed his rifle and positioned himself between the door and his family. Stay behind me. Another slam, harder. We know she's in there, one of the men shouted. Sheriff says she's to be brought back. Says you're harboring a runaway. Evangeline gasped. Runaway? I didn't run from anything. They're twisting everything again. I know. Josiah's voice was a low rumble, steady and calm. But they're not taking you. The door shook under another blow. Evangeline grabbed Josiah's arm. Josiah, you'll get hurt. I've been hurt before, he said softly. This time, I'm fighting for something worth bleeding for. Her eyes filled with tears. The men outside began shouting threats, talk of burning the cabin, of dragging Evangeline back by her hair, of taking Emma away for her own good. And that was the moment something inside Josiah snapped, not with rage, with clarity. He finally understood what Evangeline meant to him. The blows against the door grew louder, more violent. Then, crack! The top hinge tore loose. Josiah lifted the rifle. When I say get down, you get down. Evangeline nodded shakily, shielding Emma with her body. Crack! The second hinge shattered. Snow gusted in through the growing gap. Matthew snarled, Kick it in! The final blow sent the door bursting inward, and Josiah fired. The gunshot roared through the cabin, deafening and absolute. The blast struck the lead man's leg, sending him crashing into the snow with a scream. The other two stumbled back in shock. Josiah moved with a speed that defied his size, racking the rifle again. Next one who steps toward this cabin loses something worse than a leg, Matthew cursed. You're insane. Try me. Evangeline, still shielding Emma, suddenly rose to her feet. Stop! Both men whipped their heads toward her. Matthew's lip curled. Look at you, acting brave now. But Evangeline wasn't trembling anymore. She stepped beside Josiah, shoulder to shoulder. You don't get to hurt this family, she said, voice steady with a strength she didn't know she had. I belong here. Emma loves me. Josiah wants me here, and I'm not leaving. Matthew laughed, sharp and cruel. You? Family? You're nothing but... Josiah fired again. This time the bullet struck the snow inches from Matthew's boot. The deputy flinched backward so violently he fell. Josiah lowered the gun barrel to Matthew's face. You finish that sentence, he said quietly, and I won't miss next time. The men scrambled backward through the snow, dragging their injured companion. This isn't over, Matthew shouted shakily. Town won't accept her. Sheriff won't accept her. Josiah didn't shout back. He simply said, I don't need the town's acceptance. He glanced at Evangeline. I just need hers. The words struck her like a heartbeat. Matthew and his men disappeared into the storm, limping and stumbling down the trail until the wind swallowed them whole. Josiah shut the broken door as best he could. The cabin fell silent except for the crackle of the fire. Emma ran to Evangeline, wrapping her tiny arms around her waist. Mama, are you okay? It was the first time she'd said it without hesitation. Evangeline sank to her knees, hugging the child fiercely. Yes, sweetheart, I'm okay. Josiah watched them, his daughter, in the arms of the woman who had quietly become the anchor of their world. He set the rifle aside and knelt beside them. Evangeline, he said softly, they came here because they thought they could scare you away. Her eyes lifted to his. But I won't let anyone take you from us, not ever. Her breath trembled. Josiah. He brushed a loose curl from her cheek. You're safe here, with us. The storm raged on outside, but inside something stronger had settled. A promise, a declaration, a beginning forged under fire, and though none of them said the word yet, they all felt it. Family. By late afternoon, the storm had softened into a quiet snowfall. The world outside the cabin, only hours ago filled with threats and gunfire, now lay hushed beneath a thick blanket of white. Smoke curled peacefully from the chimney. The broken door had been reinforced with a wooden beam Josiah hammered into place. It wasn't perfect, but it held. It would keep them safe for the night. Inside, the atmosphere was different, warmer, softer, filled with an unspoken closeness that hadn't existed before dawn. Emma sat on the floor beside the fire, drawing with a piece of charcoal Josiah had given her. Every few minutes, she would glance up at Evangeline as though making sure she was still there, still safe, still hers. Josiah watched them quietly while stirring the pot of stew over the fire. His shoulder ached from slamming the new beam into place. His ears still rang faintly from the gunshots. But when he glanced at Evangeline, wrapped in a blanket, hair loose around her shoulders, face lit by the soft glow of the fire, he felt something in him settle, something he had been afraid to name for 2 long years. When the stew was ready, they ate together at the small wooden table. Emma insisted on sitting between them, tiny hands gripping both of theirs as though anchoring them in place. Halfway through the meal, Evangeline whispered, I'm sorry I caused all this. Josiah set his spoon down slowly. You didn't cause anything. Men like Matthew don't need a reason to be cruel. Evangeline looked down. If you weren't here, Josiah interrupted gently, this cabin would be colder. Emma would still cry at night, and I'd still be trying to convince myself that grief was all I had left. She looked up sharply, but he didn't look away. You didn't bring danger to our door, Evangeline, he said softly. You brought light back into it. Emma leaned her head against Evangeline's arm and murmured, Mama makes everything warm. Evangeline covered her mouth with her hand to hide the trembling of her lips. After dinner, Josiah fixed the fire, adding new logs until the cabin glowed gold. Evangeline tucked Emma into bed upstairs, humming softly until the child's breathing evened out. When she came back down, Josiah was sitting in the rocking chair near the fire. He didn't speak at first, didn't need to. He simply gestured to the seat beside him. She sat, hands folded in her lap. For a long moment, they listened to the wind outside, to the crackle of the logs, to the steady rhythm of the home they were slowly building together. Then Josiah spoke in a low, sincere voice. You're safe here. Evangeline felt the words settle into her bones. You don't have to earn this home. You don't have to prove anything. If you want it, it's yours. He hesitated. If you'll have it. Her breath caught. Josiah, I don't know if I deserve. You do? He leaned closer, his hand brushing hers with careful reverence. We want you here, Emma and I. You're part of this family already, whether you see it or not. Evangeline stared at their joined hands. A woman who'd been called worthless her entire life, a woman who'd never been protected, never been chosen. Yet here she was, wanted by a child who dreamed of her, defended by a man who'd faced down armed men without blinking. "I don't know what tomorrow will bring," Josiah admitted. "The town may talk, Matthew may return, life may get harder." He turned her hand over and pressed it gently against his chest. "But if you stay, we face it together." Her eyes filled with tears, not of fear this time, but of something steady and warm, hope. Softly she whispered, "I want to stay." Josiah's thumb brushed against her knuckles, a slow exhale leaving his chest. "Then stay," he murmured. The fire crackled. Snow whispered against the roof. And for the first time in her life, Evangeline felt the weight inside her ease, not because the world had changed, but because someone had finally offered to carry part of it with her. Outside, the storm had passed. Inside, the future waited quietly, unwritten, uncertain, but full of possibility. Thank you for staying with this story until the final ember faded in the cabin's fire. Stories like this remind us that sometimes the people who save us aren't the loudest or the strongest. They're the ones who show up when the world turns cold, offering warmth we never believed we deserved. If you're listening right now, tell me, where in the world are you hearing this from? Every comment feels like a small lantern in the dark, reminding me that these tales travel farther than any mountain trail. And if you still believe in love that heals, don't wander far. The next story is already on its way.